Welcome back to my channel, guys. This is Todd from Next Level Adventures. Today's episode is all about installing an e-locker into my first gen Tundra truck. Now, typically when you hear e-locker, you think Eaton e-locker, but what I'm installing is called a TRE 4x4 e-locker. This is a Chinese-made e-locker, and I chose them for a couple reasons. One, I really like their locking mechanism. It's a very positive type locking mechanism. And the other is the price. So when I was looking at purchasing this e-locker back at the end of 2023, Eaton e-lockers were $1,500. That doesn't include tax or shipping. So by the time I got to it, it would have probably been close to $1,700. This TRE 4x4 e-locker shipped all the way from China, including tax, was $670. So, almost, well under half the price of a typical Eaton e-locker. Now, I'm going to be installing this e-locker myself, and I'm going to take you through step by step of everything that it took to install it. But here's the spoiler. My first go around, this locker did not fit. And I'll walk you through all the issues that I had with it, but I was hoping to get this done in a weekend. That didn't happen. In the end, it probably took a month and a half to get all the issues resolved. Taking the locker out of the truck was fairly straightforward. It was a 3 to 4 hour job. I didn't have to break the rear brake lines. I was able to pull the axles out enough just by flexing the brake lines so that it would clear the third member, so I can just pull the third member out. So it saved me a ton of time not having to bleed the brakes again once I installed everything. Taking the differential apart, straightforward. Transferring all the parts over to the TRE locker, straightforward. Everything fit perfect. Now the problem occurs when I try to get the third member or the locker assembly into the third member. It just wouldn't fit. The ring gear was getting shoved up against the pinion gear. Now for my install, I wasn't doing a gear change, so I didn't have to mess with the pinion at all. And so I kept trying and trying. I couldn't figure out what was going on with it. I thought, all right, maybe I'm doing something wrong. But I finally got frustrated enough to where I just took everything back apart. I put the two carriers side by side, the stock carrier and the TRE e-locker side by side. And I noticed a big difference. The area where one of the bearings goes onto, it just wasn't cut deep enough into the TRE carrier, and so it was shoving the ring gear into the pinion. So I was really worried because, this is, for me, it's an expensive add-on for this truck, and it's coming straight from China. So I could have easily seen them saying, no, this is your problem. You should have went to a certified installer and they would have fixed it. But to their credit, they made everything good. But when you're dealing with a Chinese supplier, you're not dealing directly with them. So I'm communicating with my distributor here in the US, and they're communicating with the Chinese factory. And then the Chinese factory communicates back to them, and then they communicate back to me. So, you're losing 2 days every time you're going back and forth. Now, the other issue was I was taking it apart, and I think it was in February. And I happened to be taking it apart right at the Chinese Lunar New Year. And so the factory was closed for 2 weeks. So right off the bat, 2 weeks goes by and nothing can happen until they all come back. And then they start asking for information. I sent them a ton of pictures, and I showed them what the difference was between a stock carrier and their TRE locker carrier. And they had, I'll show you this page of all these measurements they wanted me to take. And in the end, they finally made it right. They sent me the part that had the correct bearing location. I put it all together, and yes, everything fit. They made everything right. It's just that what I thought was going to be a weekend job, it took a month and a half to get done. And the other thing that I ran into was the part that they sent back. Yes, it had the correct bearing location problem solved, but it had some pretty horrible porosity issues in the metallurgy. And that never gives you confidence in the part when you have that kind of porosity. It just leads to weakness in the part. All right, so all that aside, let me walk you through the entire process. I'll show you what was wrong, show you what was resolved, and I'll show you the install and how it's working. All right, so this is my new TRE e-locker. It took about 6 weeks from the time I ordered it to delivery. And so this is going in a 2005 Tundra 2-wheel drive. And so the part number for this e-locker is a TE 129. Now, if you look in the catalog, I think it says TR 129 for an e-locker. But the TR 129 is actually for their air locker for the Toyota. So I think their part numbering is a little bit funky. But let's go ahead and try to open this up, see what it looks like, huh? TE 129. It says Toyota Tacoma, but it's also good for the 8.4-inch rear end on the Toyota Tundra. TRE stickers. Their catalog. Electrical switches for the locking, tie wraps, and some shims. Oh, interesting. Electrical harness. All right, so let's just go over how this e-locker works. So if I mark this, so if I put a mark here and a mark here, this spins, right? So this is going to be held stationary while the rest of the differential spins. And so the job of this magnet is to lock this plate to the magnet so it doesn't want to spin. So right now it can easily spin. So I'm going to apply a battery, a 12 volt source to that. And now if I try to turn it, you know, you can't slip it anymore. It doesn't want to turn. And so as this is locked up and your wheels start to turn, then this will go up and this cam plate will push the pins down, which will lock the differential. But the sole purpose of this magnet is to stop the rotation of this plate right here. So right now it's fully locked and you can't rotate it. I'll take the power off and now you can rotate it again. And that's how it locks and unlocks your differential. It's always a good idea to get a baseline of your original setup. And so right now I'm measuring the amount of play between the ring gear and the pinion gear of the original setup. And it looks like it was right around 5.5 thousandths. All right, so I'm going to paint the gears because I want to see what the gear pattern looks like. So right now I'm turning the pinion gear and putting a load on the ring gear just so I get a good pattern outline on the paint. And so I'm going to do it in forward, which is this direction, and then I'll do it in reverse to see what that pattern looks like. And this being a Toyota, of course, the wear patterns look perfect both in forward and reverse. All right, so time to start tearing apart the differential. My particular truck had a limited slip, and this worked absolutely great. The problem with limited slips is that if you have one wheel in the air or one wheel on ice, there's not enough preload in the clutch packs to get power to the wheel that has the traction. And that's the main downside of a limited slip. Otherwise, limited slips work fantastic. Once you get the differential removed, it's time to start prepping the housing to accept the e-locker. And so one of the things that you need to do is drill and tap the housing so that the wire harness of the e-locker can exit the housing. And that's what I'm doing here. Now, I still have I'm not doing a gear change, so I still have my pinion gear in this housing. If you're doing this yourself, you need to really protect that pinion gear and keep all the metal chips out of it. I thought it was best not to blow all the chips off, and so that's why you see me vacuuming it here. I just didn't want to take the risk of getting metal chips into that pinion gear area. Alright guys, so here is the problem that I ran into with this e-locker. I had it all assembled, the ring gear, when I had the ring gear on there, the bearings were pressed on, everything fit perfectly. But when I put the assembly into the housing, that ring gear was getting shoved up against the pinion gear, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So I put the stock differential carrier next to the e-locker. I tore everything apart again. And I noticed that the ring gear flange locations were considerably different by about 300 thousandths of an inch. And so that difference in location of the ring gear flange was causing the ring gear just to get shoved up against the pinion gear. Now, unfortunately, when I was doing this, it landed right at the beginning of the Chinese Lunar New Year. And so 2 weeks went by before they would come back into the office. And then it was going back and forth with them, back and forth with them. They wanted a bunch of measurements. And so I had to take a bunch of measurements, both of the stock carrier and the carrier that they sent me. Once I had all the measurements that they requested, I sent them the data. They analyzed it and realized, okay, the side plate that was on the original carrier that they sent me was incorrectly machined. They sent me a new side plate with the correct bearing location. That took about 2.5 weeks to get to me, and that's what I'll show you in the next section. Just received it in. So this looks a lot better. So the other one, this bearing race wasn't, it was only ground to here. It looks like they ground it all the way through. So now the bearing will sit flush. And this whole thing won't ride up against the ring gear. So let's give it a shot. All right, so with the new side plate came another problem. Porosity. This side plate had some terrible porosity. It wasn't in a critical area, where there was a bearing or whatever. But if the porosity was this bad in this area, I'm sure there was porosity in other areas of the side plate. But at this point, my truck's been in the air for 5 or 6 weeks, and I really want to get it back. I don't want to have to go back to the guys in China and have them send me a new side plate, because that would take probably another 3 weeks. So at this point, I'm just using the side cap and putting it all back together. The cap, I need to take the old cap off, and it's really just two small bolts that you have to take off, 2 small Allen head bolts. Once you take those 2 bolts off, the 2 halves of the carrier come apart really easily. Right around this area is a time that I noticed the porosity issue. I wasn't wearing my glasses at the time, and so I thought it was just a burr, and so I took a stone to it to try to knock it down. But once I put my glasses on, I realized, oh, this is a horrible porosity issue going on here. Before I put this cover on, let's take a look at how this e-locker works. So you have a spring that disengages the locking mechanism. So once the locker's been engaged and want to disengage it, that spring disengages the locking mechanism. You have a side gear with locking teeth on it, and these locking teeth interface with that sliding plate. That sliding plate is engaged by the pins underneath the electromagnet. and so that plate slides up and down, and the teeth on the side gear interface with that. So it's a very, very positive locking mechanism, and that's what I really liked about this design. Four pinion gear design for strength. The little divots that I'm pointing out, those are just oil passages. So overall, I thought the design of this was really novel. So right now the locking plate is in the disengaged position, and that's why the side gear turns freely. Happen to have one of these TRE e-lockers and you have to take it apart like I had to, just keep in mind that side plate is counterboard for the spring, and so you have to make sure that spring stays registered to that counterboard in the side plate. And so that's why I have this upside down. I made sure that the spring was in that counterbore, and I wanted to make sure it didn't fall out, and so that's why I'm doing this whole thing upside down. That's why I'm putting these bolts, these two small hex bolts, in from upside down, because I just don't want that spring falling out of registration with the counterbore. Now sometimes you just don't realize what you're doing when you're doing it, but I look back at this and it really hurts me that I'm putting the ring gear face down on my surface plate. That is no way to treat a surface plate, so my bad. So what I'm trying to do right now is put the ring gear on, and of course I put the pins, the locking pins, into the carrier when I did this. So once I turned the carrier over, the pins fell out, but you know, whatever. I mean, these things happen. But what I'm trying to do is line up the threaded holes of the ring gear with the holes in the carrier. At this point, I'm just reusing the stock or the original ring gear bolts that came out. I'm gonna once I get everything set, you'll see that I take those old ring gear bolts out and I replace them with all new OEM ring gear bolts. But I'm just doing this so I can get this ring gear set up. All right, so before you put the bearing on, you have to put all these other parts on. So I'll just oil this down. Right, then this part goes on. down, and then this goes here. So that is basically a locking spring, so it'll snap into a groove, and once it's in a groove, it'll apply preload onto the electromagnet. All right. So you need to put this on before you put the bearing on, because if you put the bearing on first, you won't be able to put this whole thing on, and you'll be cursing yourself the whole time. Same with the ring gear. You need to put the ring gear on before you put this bearing on. Otherwise, you won't be able to get the ring gear on. These ears will block this ring gear from going on. So put the ring gear on. You don't have to bolt it down all the way. Put the magnet back on, and then put the bearing on. So what I'm trying to do is just see if this thing fits in here without this thing jamming itself against the pinion gear. Okay, so this is much better. So now I have clearance. Okay, before I didn't have any clearance. So now I can set the correct back spacing for this. So that looks good. Now, honestly, if it would have been far better if they didn't cut as much of the bearing surface off as they did. They probably cut more than they needed to, because you can see how much extra slop there is in there, and that just made it harder for me to shim it. But again, if I requested a new side plate, I think it would have been very difficult for them to understand that there was too much slop in there now rather than not enough as before. And it would have taken another 2.5 weeks to get a new side plate if they were willing to make me another side plate. Before I set the backlash on the ring gear, I want to bolt the ring gear up for the last time, and so I'm using new OEM ring gear bolts with red Loctite. I'm gonna torque them down in this fixture that I made. There is an arm bolted to the pinion gear flange, and when you go to tighten these bolts, the gear ratio between the ring gear and the pinion gear is working in your favor. So when you apply 95 pound-feet of torque to the bolts, that arm sees very little torque, and so you can get a lot of leverage to tighten these bolts without much effort. think I tightened these bolts down in 3 different stages. I think I went to 30 pound-feet to 60 pound-feet, and then I went to 95 pound-feet to torque the bolts to their final spec. Every time I tighten the bolt to whatever spec I'm hitting, I'll put a mark on there just so I know I tightened that bolt. And I'm doing some kind of cross pattern, so I'll do bolts 180 degrees apart just so everything gets tightened evenly. You can see as I torque the ring gear bolts that I don't have to hold that leverage arm that's bolted to the pinion gear. It just runs against one of the uprights. But again, you can apply a lot of torque on those bolts without hardly putting any leverage on that mounting arm. Once the ring gear was finally bolted up, now it's time to set the backlash. And so that's what you're seeing now. And you're going to see me taking the carrier in and out of the third member, which shims on both sides of the bearing races, and checking the backlash of the ring gear as I'm going. And I'll subtract and add shims as necessary. I will preload the bearing races as much as possible, so if a shim just slides in there really freely, I will keep adding shims until I can barely get that shim in there, just so that whole thing is preloaded and it gives stability to the whole carrier assembly. So the stock setup had 5.5 thousandths of backlash. With this new setup, I'm getting about 6.5 thousandths, but that's good enough for me. I think Toyota specs out somewhere between 4 to 8 thousandths backlash, but don't quote me on that. Once the backlash was set, now I wanted to verify the contact pattern on the ring gear. You're going to see me paint a good deal of the ring gear with setup paint, just because some of the issues that I had with the carrier made me question the quality of the build of the carrier. So I just wanted to make sure everything was concentric and all the gear pattern was consistent across all the teeth of the ring gear. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'll turn the pinion gear while putting a load on the ring gear, just so I can get a good visualization of what the contact patch on the gear setup paint looks like. And in the end, the wear pattern looked perfect. So I was really happy with the setup. This is what the contact pattern looks like on the ring gear. It looks really good. And the most important thing, it looks really good all the way around the ring gear. So I'm really happy with the setup. This is what the assembled third member looks like. So you can see the wires for the electromagnet coming out through the carrier housing. I haven't really commented on anything, taking the differential out of the truck or putting it back in, just because most of it's pretty straightforward, and you'll see a lot of this stuff on YouTube. But one thing I did notice was that confused me a little bit was when I was putting the axles in, it felt like I was hitting a hard stop. So you see a space between the axle hub and the axle housing. That axle hub has a really nice precision fit. So when you push it in, it feels like you're bottoming out against something, but it's just a really nice precision fit between that hub and the axle. So if you slowly tighten all four bolts down equally, it'll slowly pull the axle in, and you're set. All right, so I have the new TRE e-locker installed in my truck, and now I'm ready to test it. I have one wheel jacked up in the air, the other wheel is on the ground. Right now the e-locker is not activated, so that wheel is spinning without the truck moving forward. Right now I'm going to engage the e-locker, and so now you'll see the truck start moving forward. And then I will put it in reverse, and you'll see how long it takes to engage. So it takes about a quarter turn to engage and disengage the wheels from the locker. And so once I go forward again, it's about a quarter turn before both wheels are locked together again. All right, guys, so I hope you enjoyed that video. Definitely a challenge getting that locker installed, but in the end, everything worked out fine. I've put a couple hundred miles on this truck since I've installed it, and no problems at all. Locker still works fine. The one worry that I had was a porosity issue, and that the worries have gone down a lot. I'm not going to be using this to do any kind of rock crawling. My truck is only a two-wheel drive vehicle, so what I'm going to be using it for shouldn't be a problem at all. So in the end, yes, definitely a challenge getting it installed, but I'm still a happy camper with it. I am going to do a sneak peek on one of my upcoming videos, and this is my mini snorkel install. And so this is my mini snorkel. It's going to mount on my front fender. So it won't be a full-size snorkel, it'll be a mini snorkel. You guys are going to have to wait a few weeks for that. I've got my, what do I have coming? I have my Midland radio install, my GMRS radio install, and my Prince roof rack install, and then I'll do the mini snorkel. So please like and subscribe so you don't miss these videos. Thank you all for watching. Take care. Bye.